Welcome back. You're watching SA Today with me, Unathi Patyasha. Let's take you now back to Parliament, where Finance Minister is expected to announce an emergency fuel price intervention. Let's listen in.
In fuel prices. Our commitment in the 2022 budget was to strike a delicate balance between keeping money in the pockets of our people amid the economic shock of COVID-19 pandemic, while at the same time striving to restore the health of our public finances. By refraining from including an inflationary increase to fuel levy and road accident fund levy, we managed to provide much-needed relief to South Africans to the value of 3.5 billion. In addition, I indicated at the time of the budget that Minister Mantashe and I agreed to review all aspects of the fuel regulation. Let me emphasize again that this was in recognition of the increased cost of living for all South Africans, as well as the need to do what we can within our commitment in the 2022 budget was to strike a delicate balance between keeping money in the pockets of our people amid the economic shock of COVID-19 pandemic, while at the same time striving to restore the health of our public finances. By refraining from including an inflationary increase to fuel levy and road accident fund levy, we managed to provide much needed relief to South Africans to the value of 3.5 billion. In addition, I indicated at the time of the budget that Minister Mantashe and I had agreed to review all aspects of the fuel price levy regulation. Let me emphasize again that this was in recognition of the increased cost of living for all South Africans, as well as the need to do what we can within our limited resources to support the economic recovery. However, the day after I tabled the budget, we woke up to the news of the escalation in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The conflict will almost certainly intensify some of the risks we had already highlighted in the budget review 2022, specifically the risk of continued supply disruption and high inflation. A few weeks ago, during my address to this House, I spelled out some of these risks and the likely impact that the conflict may have on our economy and revenue proposals. A big concern for the South African economy is imported inflation with direct impact on fuel and food prices. We are equally concerned about the secondary effects on the rest of the economy and the overall impact on the local and global economic recovery that was beginning to take root. While the most recent data released by State SA showed a slight upside in the growth of the gross domestic product, when compared with National Treasury's estimates for 2021, the growth outlook going forward is much less promising and subject to new emerging risks. Most notable is the Russia-Ukraine conflict. In addition, the re-emergence of the COVID-19 virus in China and the consequent lockdowns, which are increasing constraints on global supply chains, are also of concern. Well, okay, I was going to. Deputy Speaker, since the start of the conflict, there has already been sharp increases in the price of crude oil. This has had a direct impact on fuel prices in our country. In March of this year, the petrol price rose to 21.60 cents per litre for unleaded petrol in the inland region, while diesel prices rose to 19.55 cents per litre. Of concern is that the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy has already advised that fuel prices in April are likely to increase even further. Honourable members, to mitigate the impact of these escalating fuel prices, I hereby table the following proposal, which will be included in the 2022 rates and monetary amounts and amendments of revenue laws bill for consideration by this House. a temporary reduction of the general fuel levy by R1.50 per litre for the period 16th of April to 31st of May 2022. This will reduce the levy for petrol from R3.85 per litre to R2.35 per litre, and the levy on diesel to R3.07 per litre to R2.20 per litre. Of course, these amounts exclude the levies such as the Road Accident Fund levy and the carbon fuel levy. The intention of the temporary reduction of the fuel levy is to support a phasing in the fuel price increases that we are expecting in the short term. This will go somewhere in assisting South Africans to adjust to the new reality. Deputy Speaker, the proposed reduction of the general fuel levy for a period of 2 months will not require adjustment to the annual national budget, as the proposal is expected not to have an impact on the fiscal framework. The proposed reduction of the general fuel levy will be funded by a liquidation of a portion of the strategic crude oil reserves. In this instance, the revenue foregone by the reduction in the levies will be recouped through a sale of strategic crude oil reserves, which are held by the Strategic Fuel Fund, which is a subsidiary of the Central Energy Fund. The sale will be required to raise around R6 billion. The sale will be authorized by the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, and the funds will be deposited into the Equalization Fund at the Central Energy Fund. The Minister of Finance and the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy have the authority to approve the release of funds from the Equalization Fund to the National Revenue Fund in terms of the CEF Act number 38 of 1977. Deputy Speaker, the fuel levy reduction will be temporary. A broad package of relief measures will be explored, and they will come into effect after the expiry of the 2 months fuel levy reduction. In this regard, the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy proposes the following package of measures to be introduced after the expiry of the temporary measures from Wednesday, the 1st of June 2022. A reduction in the basic fuel price of 3 cents per litre in line with the recommendation of the review done by DMRE. A termination of the demand side management of 10 cents per litre, particularly in the Gauteng province. An introduction of the price cap of the 19-octane petrol following from the previous DMR proposals and on consultation. This means that retailers can sell below the regulated price. The termination of the practice to publish government guidance by the DMRE on diesel prices to promote greater competition. The regulatory accounting system, including the retail margins, wholesale margin, secondary storage, and distribution margins, will be reviewed to assess whether adjustment can be made to lower the margins over the medium term. Interventions will be considered by the DMRE to reduce the price pressure for eliminating paraffin over the medium term. We're doing all of these things in line with our overall commitment to keeping money in the pockets of South Africans during these trying times, while at the same time restoring the health of our public finances. Minister Mantashe and I have released a joint statement which provides further details on this matter. I thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Honorable D.T. George.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. For a number of years, the question hanging over our heads has been, what happens when government runs out of money? Government doesn't have any money of its own. It all belongs to the people. And year after year, Scopa hears how billions of rands have been irregularly spent, wastefully spent, or simply stolen. And there is never any consequence. Nobody is held to account and nobody goes to jail. Yesterday, the DA proposed a motion of no confidence in the President's cabinet, precisely because our economy has been mismanaged to the point of collapse, where we're unable to attract investment capital because there is no confidence. Unemployment levels hit a record 35% in the last quarter.
Deputy Speaker?
Yes.
Please can the heckling be limited to a hearable stance, because we can't hear. He said thrown in the speaker at the podium.
Yeah. Sustained, honorable members, keep your voices low.
And youth unemployment is at 65%. Poverty continues to ruin the lives and future potential of more and more South Africans every day. We face a cost of living crisis with skyrocketing fuel prices, driven largely but not only by the upward spiral in the fuel price. The fuel price has been too high for too long because of government's economic mismanagement, and this has crowded out opportunities for economic growth, and we will never get it back again. The fuel price consists of four basic elements: the basic fuel price, taxes and levies, retail and wholesale margins, and storage and distribution costs. The price of crude oil and the exchange rate impacts heavily on the price. We don't have much control over the price of crude oil, although we certainly made an enormous mistake when the ANC government chose the side of Russia in its illegal war against Ukraine. The war has impacted negatively on the price of crude oil, and when countries such as South Africa do not add value in bringing the war to an end, we actually do pay the price of a more expensive fuel. The ANC government's disgraceful behavior at the United Nations just served to make life more difficult for everyone in South Africa and just served to drive more people into poverty. If government was actually concerned about the fuel price, the oil price, and how it impacted on all South Africans, it would join the rest of the world in doing everything possible to stop the war. Although the dollar-rand exchange rate is subject to market vagaries, it is possible to make our currency more attractive on the markets by ensuring that South Africa is an attractive investment destination. In that way, foreign investors in particular would want to purchase rands for investment and increase its value. The DA has previously called on government to reduce the fuel levy, and that would result in a reduction in the petrol price in the region of 20%. This would take pressure off rising food and transport prices and bring immediate relief to the poor. The petrol price in South Africa is higher than it is in Swaziland, Mozambique, Botswana, Tanzania, Namibia, and Kenya because the fuel levy in South Africa is too high. It is too high because government relies heavily on it to fund its mismanagement of the public finances at 6% of revenue. Bad government is making all South Africans poorer. Social grants are set to increase by 4.5% in April, but electricity and fuel prices are set to go up by more than double that in April. Electricity prices by 9.6% and fuel prices by 11%. Food prices have increased by 5.7% in the past year, according to Stats SA, and that will gather momentum this year. Cutting the fuel levy will create fiscal pressure that can be alleviated in many ways. The root cause of our dire fiscal situation is bad policy, incompetence, and corruption.
You can't keep like this.
There are much better ways to deal with these than taxing the poor. South Africa can no longer delay tackling our problems at their root. We need to grow tax revenue and jobs by rapidly reforming our economy to be open and competitive. We need to make better use of tax revenue by appointing public officials on merit and jailing corrupt officials. The benefits would accrue rapidly. The minister's proposal to liquidate a portion of the strategic crude oil reserves is very short-term relief, is high risk and reckless. The purpose of holding a reserve is to ensure that South Africa does not run out of fuel during an emergency situation that is not easy to foresee. It was not long ago that an attempt was made to sell our strategic oil reserves under the guise of a stock rotation that was nothing more than a corrupt attempt to enrich a connected few. We need far more detail on what this transaction would entail and how the revenues would be replenished and at what price. If we are to take a short-term view and not make the structural reforms that would eliminate or reduce high fuel tax, then we should look at funding the short-term intervention with additional revenue that will be received as a result of the uptick in commodity prices that will temporarily increase tax revenue. We do have that temporary fiscal space. We welcomed President Ramaphosa's acknowledgement in his State of the Nation address that business must be the job creator in South Africa. The incapable state is certainly unable to do that. We welcome the minister's statement at his budget speech of what he intends to do about the state-owned enterprise and managing the public sector wage bill. Structural reform is the only way to grow our economy and avoid the significant risks that the minister is now incurring. We are all agreed that the fuel price is too high and that immediate relief is needed. We just differ on how. We support the suspension of the general fuel levy. Selling the strategic reserves is a desperate move for a government that has run out of ideas. It is possible to reduce the fuel tax immediately without selling our reserves. It just requires political will to do what will need to be done anyway. We all know what happens when government runs out of money. It is forced to change its behavior. If not, the people will remove you. Thank you.
Honorable Mautri. Honorable members, no. Kashola, Bukempili Assembly. Bukempili uyena utorwa la mask.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, besides the sale of strategic crude oil reserves, as the EFF were even more shocked that we were called here to listen to what was supposed to be an intervention. And yet all we had was nothing but ambiguities and insinuations beside the obvious. The sale of strategic crude oil reserves is indeed for emergencies. The miscalculation by the finance minister also shows that there is a general misunderstanding of the economic challenges facing workers and the poor. And this is because of Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa and the collective incompetent cabinet who continue to mismanage the economy of this country. The reality is that the sale of strategic crude oil reserves must not excite as because we are led by people who always see crisis and pain of our people as a way to loot. The first thing they ask themselves is, how are you going to eat instead of how are we going to help our people? The price of petrol has drastically gone up since Mr. Ramaphosa became president. And the truth is that it has started well before Russian military operations in Ukraine. But it is not only the price of petrol that has gone up. Everything essential and necessary for survival is now more expensive than it was before Mr. Ramaphosa as the president. His new dawn is a new dawn of high petrol prices, a new dawn of higher electricity prices, a new dawn of higher food prices, a new dawn of higher transportation prices. When Mr. Ramaphosa was elected president in February 2018, a litre of petrol was only 14 rands. Today we stand here, Deputy Speaker, a litre of petrol is now nearing a record of 22 rands per litre. In 2018, a household needed just over 2,000 rands to afford a food basket. Today, the amount of money a household needs to afford a decent food has nearly doubled to more than 4,000 rands. Because of the corruption and incompetence of the ruling party, which allowed the thievery of railway tracks and brought the railway system to its knees, workers spend more on public transport than they should. The consequences of the failed new dawn. When you increase the price of petrol, the price of everything that has to do with transportation also increases. The whole crisis is made worse by the theft of 10 million barrels of the country's strategic oil reserves that are stolen in 2015 for way less than the going market rate through schemes of corruption. More than 6 years later, Deputy Speaker, no one has been held accountable, and the then Minister Tina Jomet Peterson has instead been rewarded. Now, what is to be done? Firstly, any effort to revive South Africa's petrol structure and interventions to lower the price of petrol cannot be done by the Treasury, Minister of Finance. It requires an independent and objective body that is not obsessed with austerity and zigzagging neoliberal policies, even when evidence shows failures. And institutions such as Stats SA will be best placed to carry this task, and it must be linked with reviewing the whole CIP data. This is why we cannot continue to defund credible and independent constitutions that should conduct empirical data collection and analysis to inform policy decision making and rely on the Reserve Bank that is also obsessed with neoliberal zigzagging. Secondly, Deputy Speaker, we need to finalize the prosecution of criminals who stole the oil from the Strategic Fuel Fund and reserve the transaction to get our oil back. It looks like the people responsible for prosecution on this matter are also receiving cash to stall the matter. Number 3, we must develop a South Africa's fuel sovereignty plan that will interconnect research and exploration into sources of fuel owned by the state, beneficiation and industrial policy. It was done with Sasol. It can be done again. Lastly, Deputy Speaker, we must do away with all the legislation that is chipping away at the Mineral, Petroleum and Resource Development Act that has laid a strong foundation for the transfer of ownership to Black people if it is implemented properly and beneficiation is done properly.
Wonderful.
We know that the only reason why the gas amendment bill and I was waiting for a Deputy Speaker. Can you chill when?
Deputy Speaker, you have made a ruling in the past that members of this House should not cast aspersions on public servants who are not part of this House and unable to respond for themselves. The member just said those who are supposed to prosecute on this matter of the sale are actually are given money to stall. And we know that the NPA is responsible for prosecuting people. And the member just cast aspersion on the NPA that they are actually being given money to stall the prosecution. And the member is not actually bringing a substantive motion, and public servants will not be.
Honorable member, we'll rule on this. Proceed, we will rule on this. Yeah, we want to do a considered ruling on the matter.
Hey, Chief, I'm dealing with matters of national importance. Please respect this platform. I'm giving direction to this country, which is directionless. Deputy Speaker, we know that the only reason why the gas amendment bill and the upstream petroleum resources development bill are to make it easy for Total in Mossel Bay and Shell in the Karoo to loot our resources unabated. If you don't see a drop in the price of petrol immediately, Deputy Speaker, this country will face a revolt like it has never seen before. Thank you very much. Pabo, you must behave.
Honorable Singh.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, honorable members and Minister.
Honorable members, no, man, you can't do that. No.
Whilst any measure to reduce the impact of the increasing fuel price is welcome, and many in this House, political parties and outside of this House have been making such calls, I think there needs to be clarity, Honorable Minister, on what you just said from the podium. When I read the draft statement, and I understand that it was a draft statement that was circulated to us as Chief Whips, it doesn't make mention of the R1.50. And what I'm trying to understand for South Africans is on the 6th of April, when there's a price adjustment to fuel, because we know it happens on the first Wednesday of every month, what will the net impact be on the person who's filling up fuel? Because yes, R1.50 will be deducted from the fuel levy, but yet there are going to be things beyond your control and our control, which is the price of crude oil at that time, which is also going to be the rand-dollar exchange. So the net effect may be on the 6th of April that instead of somebody paying 21 Rand 50, which would have been the price, you'll pay 20 Rand, but it would have increased from what it was. So, Minister, can you please explain that so South Africans know what is going to happen to them on the 6th of April? Now, also, Honorable Speaker, we know that it is largely what happened in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, that has caused this increase in price. We know it is COVID that caused this. Whatever you want to call it, you can call it. I'm speaking now. But what we have done is that we have indeed found the seed of a hidden opportunity in this adversity. And there's always hope that we can find this seed. However, having said that, Honourable Chairperson, Honourable Minister, you mentioned the Road Accident Fund and the fact that you did not announce increases to the RAF levy. Well, that may be well and good, but I think it is well known, and if one reads the media, and I attended a meeting last week of the Standing Committee on the Auditor General, that the Road Accident Fund has taken the Auditor General to court because they don't like the opinion that the Auditor General has expressed on the financial accounting. And the reason for that is the Road Accident Fund wants to introduce its own accounting principles, which are against what is the normal, generally accepted accounting principles. Now, that is not acceptable. They want to hide almost 300 billion rand in a contingent liability by saying there's only 27 billion rand liability. Honorable Minister, you've got to look at this, and you've got to look at the fact that an accountant general has got to be appointed urgently, and you intervene together with the Auditor General in this matter, because we cannot allow the RAF to do things that they want to do on their own against our principles. The other thing, Honorable Minister, in looking at the 1st June proposals, I hope that the public will be allowed to make some input, because at some stage many years ago, all public transport operators, buses and taxi operators, were given an opportunity for a rebate on fuel. I remember it very clearly because I come from that industry. And we need to reintroduce that rebate on fuel for those who provide public transport. So then taxi owners would reduce their fares, bus owners would reduce their fares, and that would help the public out. That will help the public out there. Lastly, Honourable Deputy Speaker and Minister, the Fuel Retailers Association have been making submissions, a number of submissions on margins, and I hope that these will be taken very, very seriously by yourself and the Minister of Mineral Energy as you move forward towards your 1st June proposals. But for now, we welcome any relief, but it should not be robbing Peter to pay Paul. Thank you very much, Honourable.
Where is Sheila? Where is Sheila? Peter Paul only. What's wrong with you? Okay. Honorable Boshoff.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Chair. Everybody knows that South African fuel is highly taxed. That is why petrol manufactured in South Africa or even imported through our ports is more expensive than the same fuel in neighboring countries. It is easy to tax fuel as people and businesses rather save on other expenses than substantially cutting on fuel. Untaxed petrol is harder to find than, let's say, untaxed cigarettes. The tax is also easy to administer as there are a small number of figurative turnpikes where all fuel has to flow through and where tax can be collected. However, this taxation of fuel is contentious. It is not progressive, meaning the burden rests equally on rich and poor, if not heavier on the poor. It also inhibits economic growth as it is detrimental to the South African, the competitiveness of South African businesses. The Freedom Fund Plus, among others, has urged the government to revisit the price structure of liquid fuels in South Africa. Not only the taxes, but also the fact that prices are calculated as if all fuel is imported in its final form, which is clearly not the case and exaggerates the influence of foreign exchange volatility. We should keep in mind that the most important reason for rising fuel prices over the past 2 decades is not changes in the price of crude oil, but depreciation of the rand. The rand depreciates because more people want to sell rands than buy them. When the economy is not regarded as a bread of fixed size which should be redistributed, but as one which can feed everyone if it is allowed to grow, the rand will be able to buy more barrels of oil. Unfortunately, currently the economy is managed to be uncompetitive. Today, the Ministers of Energy and Finance announced a partial tax vacation for 2 months, during which time the whole structure will be rethought. This is to be welcomed, and hopefully the new structure will be an improvement. There are indeed several potential problems in the whole fuel industry. The country's refineries, except that of Sasol, are senior citizens. Those which have not burned down or been shut down are about to be shut down. There might be a temptation to charge a new levy to finance the building of a new refinery. During the current transport transition to electric and even hydrogen-powered transport, this might not be a good long-term investment for public money. To sell a part of the strategic reserve is indeed a risky venture. It is literally like having a dam to be used during droughts, but one never knows whether one is at the end of a short drought or at the beginning of a very long one. In other words, we may expect that the war in Eastern Europe will not amount to permanent fuel deficits. But the structural changes in transport favoring renewable energy sources over fossil fuels is less immediate, but it can be expected to be permanent. Nevertheless, the expression urges us never to let the good crisis go wasted, and we should acknowledge that the government needed this advice. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Boshoff. Honorable Swart.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, the ACDP welcomes today's joint statement about the temporary reduction in the general fuel levy pending a package of additional measures from 1 June 2022. We welcome the fact, Honourable Minister, of a reduction of R1.50. It is not an insignificant amount. And when one considers that escalating fuel prices have put considerable pressure on the cost of transport, food and other goods and services, and that consumers are suffering due to these increases, as well as possible electricity increases, as well as interest rate increases, this announcement should be welcomed. The ACDP raised this issue with both President Ramaphosa and you as well, Minister of Finances, during the question time. And it's important to note that since 2012, taxes and related levies on the fuel have on average more than doubled as a share of the fuel price and account for 34% of the fuel price. Now, research on the fuel price regulations have indicated that a combination of regulatory amendments can reduce the fuel price significantly, and that we trust is what will occur when one looks at the additional package of measures. When one also considers the amendments to the international component of the basic fuel price, which were proposed in 2018 by the Department of Mineral Resources, but were sadly never implemented, it is also to be commended, Minister, if I understood your statement correctly, that that is now to be implemented, and that is also to be supported. So whilst one supports these aspects, I think the issue of concern relates to the funding of the 6 billion that is required, and of course how much of the strategic oil reserve is to be sold, at what price, and what risk does that bring. Is this possibly a case of selling part of the family silver to deal with an interim issue? Now, I appreciate, Honourable Minister, you mentioned the fiscal framework and that one can't touch that, but as we suggested in the past, is it not possible to consider the expected commodity price tax windfall that was already penciled in at 71 billion rand, and which is expected to be far more? Would that not be a wise aspect as well to look at? While we appreciate the reduction, I do, from the ACDP's perspective, believe that Parliament will have to look very carefully at the sale of the portion of the strategic oil reserves and whether this introduces any risk, given the fact that we do not have refined oil reserves. So let us exercise our oversight from our perspective, but thank you, Honourable Minister, for this welcome announcement.
Deputy Speaker, indeed, the war between Russia and Ukraine has placed pressure on the domestic fuel prices. Naturally, this conflict has caused supply shocks to the global economy, and we are not immune to that.
Minister, you've become in this short space of time a Father Christmas, probably because I think we must take credit for that. The decision to temporarily reduce the general fuel levy by 150 cents is indeed welcome, as it's going to provide the South African motorists and the economy in general with the much needed relief at this very important period. We also agree with you when you say that time needs to be set aside to actually have a discussion about a comprehensive raft of measures that can be introduced to try and make sure that we provide further cushion to the South African economy and ordinary people. You will recall that one of the issues that we've actually advocated for here very passionately is the issue of value-added tax. We do not agree with you when you say that if you were to reduce 1%, the fiscus would lose about 30 billion, but you are not able to tell us as to how much revenue we're going to lose by reducing corporate income tax from 28% to 27%, and what the effect of previous increases were on the South African economy. That empirical study is required, Mr. Minister. But I think the other issue in broad terms is that we continue to provide cushions to the South African economy, but businesses don't fall in line. For example, we also run the risk where price increases which were made at the beginning of the year, people might not actually reduce their prices, even though we're trying to mitigate that effect on the South African economy. I'm talking about the cost of transport, for example. You know, people have already increased prices. One of the things that the government, the Competition Commission, for example, did during COVID, they were vigilant around people who are inflating prices unnecessarily. I think we need to be vigilant even during this period so that we don't provide a cushion for the public, but it doesn't reach the public, the intended beneficiaries. It's actually end up people making more money. The other issue is that we continue to do this thing. We gave people loan guarantee schemes, for example, extended loans to the private sector. But the unemployment rate did not improve even after people got bailouts from us. It's a problem in general. Even with the 32.8 billion rands that we gave to companies, which was a bailout during the social unrest in KZN and Gauteng, did they make sure that our people didn't lose jobs after we spent taxpayers' money doing those things? So we need to assess the effectiveness of the measures that we put in place. We are obviously concerned about the sale of strategic crude reserves. Siteni 4 minutes nje.
What 4 minutes? Awusakwazi ukufunda nje.
Angisakwazi ukufunda.
4 seconds. Is ATM here? Good, Honorable Heron.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, the skyrocketing fuel prices in South Africa are driving inflation, high cost of living, and strangling economic growth. And direct fuel consumers and those who don't purchase retail fuel are under enormous pressure as the rapidly increasing cost of fuel is increasing the cost of commuting, increasing the cost of food, and driving inflation. And of course, inflation is managed by raising interest rates, adding additional burdens to those who have loans, bonds, and other debt. Regulation of the fuel price has a long history in South Africa, and these regulatory powers should be used to be rapidly responsive to local and international market dynamics. So it's appropriate that the ministers have intervened to release this pressure valve, and the temporary relief is a welcome intervention. We welcome every cent that can be saved at the fuel pump, but what we need is a sustainable solution which doesn't require us to fill up our tanks every week. It would be much better if we could save households hundreds of rands a week by building a functioning public transport network. Deputy Speaker, the composition of the fuel price at the pump requires a fundamental overhaul so that the cost of fuel is not another factor holding back economic growth and generating jobs for all South Africans. And our government must use its powers to restructure the regulated components, being the margins and the taxes and the levies. So in this regard, we welcome the announcement that the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy will be bringing substantial changes to the composition and structure of the fuel price. The proposed reduction of the basic fuel levy by 3 cents a litre and the termination of the 10 cents per litre demand-side management levy are also welcome steps towards this restructuring. The proposed removal of the price cap and the move to a competitive retail fuel pricing regime would be a significant shift. Deputy Speaker, South Africa's 15 million barrels of strategic oil reserves are meant to safeguard us from an energy crisis and to protect our economy. So leveraging these oil reserves to provide temporary relief does create some serious risk of devastating consequences if the disposal of these reserves is not reversed by a highly disciplined replenishment program that is actually implemented. So finally, Deputy Speaker, we welcome the relief being offered to South Africa's consumers and economy, and we call on our government to rapidly pursue the restructuring of the regulated component of the fuel price. And the role of the increasing South Africa's refinement of crude oil should also be part of the restructuring process, since local refining has the opportunity to create downstream job opportunities. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Heron. Honorable members, I just wish to read you a rule. Every beginning of the sitting, each presiding officer who starts the proceedings make reference to safety in the House and makes that request for us to also keep our masks on and sit in our allocated places for purposes of that safety. Here's Rule 71. If the presiding officer is of the opinion that a member is deliberately contravening the provision of these rules, or that a member is disregarding the authority of the chair, or that a member's conduct is grossly disorderly, he or she may order the member to leave the chamber immediately for the remainder of the day's sitting. I am reading this rule so that we don't have to go back to reading it. Thank you very much. Honorable Sheikh Imam.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, through your minister, let me tell you about the reality on the ground. The latest report, electricity costs is going up by 9.5%, water by 6.5%, sanitation by 6.5%, refuse by 5%, property rates by 5.2%. There is collusion between the big 5 supermarkets in the country, and you would find that the price of foodstuff has been rocketing. The cost on airfares have increased. Now, whilst we welcome the relief that you are talking about, Minister, I think what is important to note that the road accident fund is not an asset, it's actually a liability. Maybe it's time to dispose of this function. Let it be handled by the private sector and include some kind of insurance through the